Yeah. Yeah. We're live and very excited to be joined by one of the best investigative journalists, authors in America of his time, of our time, of his generation, veteran Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. Gary Rivlin is the guy on the screen, and he's got a new book. It's called AI Valley. Microsoft, Google, and the $1 trillion race to cash in on artificial intelligence. Gary, whenever you have a book coming out, I get so excited, and what a privilege it is to get to talk to you about it. Thank you for joining me, and congratulations. Look at all those books of yours behind you.
Well, thank you for that introduction. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
So you started your career at the beginning of your career, you were covering tech, Silicon Valley, and venture capitalism. You've been doing this a long time, and you've come back to it with this book. Tell me a little bit about your past work.
Right. So actually, I was a political reporter before that, usually urban politics, Chicago political machine, etc. But in the mid 1990s, with the rise of the internet, I'd actually had an engineering background. I went to school as an engineer. I actually programmed computers. I didn't find particularly interesting. I moved off of that. But when the internet came around, I thought, oh, this is interesting. Kind of this mad dash to cash in on the internet, the .coms and stuff. And so in the second half of the 90s through the mid 2000s, I covered it, first as a freelance writer, then for Wired magazine and the New York Times. But then kind of mid 2000s, I moved back to politics. But then I just got this random email from Reid Hoffman, well-known figure in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
I've known him since the early 2000s, always struck me as a good guy, that he's co-founded his first company since LinkedIn. And the whole idea, there's this one line, like, instead of us learning symbolic language to talk to a computer would talk to us in natural language, in English, or whatever one's language. And I just found that fascinating. So I had, remarkably good timing because of luck that, just as ChatGPT was about to upend the world, I said, maybe I should be looking at this artificial intelligence stuff.
It's a great read because it gives so much background. For me, I've been basically the premise of my show is to cover important issues and talk to smart people who know about them, to fight apathy. As long as I've been doing the program, that's what I've been covering. For some reason, I've been opposed to reading about, learning about, thinking about artificial intelligence. I don't know why. I'm not sure why. It seems so complex, so intimidating, and so big. A lot of the language around it bores me, and I just don't understand it. Your book really is a great book for anybody like me, and I'm sure there's a lot of listeners of mine that have avoided it as well. A lot of folks have been begging me to talk about it. Talk to me just about how you did this book. You mentioned kind of the impetus, getting an email from a billionaire tech investor, Reid Hoffman, but talk about how you did this book.
I was kind of the skeptic back in the mid 1990s. Everyone was saying, oh, the internet's going to change the world overnight. Everyone's going to get rich. And, obviously the internet has had a huge impact, but people didn't get rich. Most people didn't get rich overnight. Most of these .coms went out of business. So I kind of approached this thinking I'd be a skeptic. I've covered product launches, and the companies are always overstating what they could do. But I will confess to you, the first time I used ChatGPT, I thought it was sorcery. I thought it was magic. It would just kind of create these full paragraph. In fact, you'll laugh. My first task was write me a 5,000 word book proposal for a book about AI. And
sure, you're Gary Rivlin.
And well, I didn't hand it in, but I was just curious what would it do? And first off, it spit something out in a few minutes. It's 5,000 words in a few minutes. But two things: it's much better read than I am, and it's a far better memory than I do. So they're kind of little insights, quotes, little statistics. The other thing is it can't write for crap. I mean, it's flat. It's very pedestrian kind of thing. It was but it really kind of taught me the strengths and weaknesses. In fact, if I had one wish for people, go play with it. Figure out what it's good at and what it's not good at. Because, I use it all the time in my work as a research assistant, as an editor, for feedback. It's kind of...
Just on that question, go play with it. I think that's a really important piece of advice for people around my age that are intimidated by, maybe over 40, 60, whatever. I don't know if you're still working, especially, and you're trying to save your job. When it comes to the biggest question to me isn't necessarily the threats, as you call them, the laser-eyed autonomous robots that are working under their own command, but the more imminent issue for a lot of us of a certain age, of any age, really, my daughters are in college, what is it going to do for the job market? What does AI mean for the job market? And I feel like you can talk about a lot of the different industries and how they're going to be affected, but more specifically, I think you have an argument that those of us who learn how to use these AI tools for our work will fare a lot better than those of us who don't. So if you're intimidated by it, you haven't figured it out, maybe now's the time to use it and leverage it to keep your job.
Right. I mean, there's some exceptions to this, but to me, in the short and medium term, it's not going to be AIs replacing humans. It's going to be humans who use AI besting humans who don't, because you could be faster. I mean, people talk about it as almost like this superpower. And so, I mean, there are some job categories, like I'll give you a couple examples. It's already being used in customer service. Like you call up, instead of waiting on hold for all this time, you can have a bot and it speaks to you. And I want to change my password. Okay, that's easy. And so, millions of people in this country, tens of millions of people around the world are in customer service. I'm imagining that's going to shrink a lot. 8 to 10 million people in this country make their living as driving. And so, long haul trucking, Uber, taxi, local delivery. I was just out in San Francisco. There's taxis, these robo taxis in San Francisco, three or four other cities. They're carrying 1.3 million people a month.
I didn't know that until 2 weeks ago. My buddy, it was an Australian guy, a foreigner, visiting LA. Like none of my American friends, if they told me, I didn't know. And he sends me a message from the inside of a robo car, an autonomous vehicle. And I was like, I had to look it up, and it was similar, those numbers that you just mentioned. And this is LA, you're talking about Northern California, right?
Well, so it's in San Francisco, LA, Austin, and Phoenix. And so, I mean, I just think that's a glimpse of the future. And, I wish we were talking about this. I wish policymakers, others, were anticipating this, because it really is going to knock off a lot of jobs.
What other industries? Name a little bit more about the other industries and jobs that you think it's going to knock off.
Yeah, so first off, the big surprise here, the surprise to people who've been paying attention to this for a long time, is it didn't come for blue collar first. It's not the factory floor, it's not the warehouses where AI is posing a threat. I mean, that's coming. There'll be robots, they're just not there yet. It's the knowledge workers, it's the creatives, it's the white collar professionals. So, illustrators used to have to pay an illustrator, a corporation pay an illustrator $500 for their promotional material. Now you could just use AI. Voice actors. I mean, these models are amazing. It can take a minute or two of your voice, even less, and kind of have you say anything. And so voice acting is a career that's going by the wayside. But kind of looking a little bit further ahead, to me, like the creative agency that has 100 people working for it, well, a lot of those junior people who are just doing rudimentary drawings or writing up kind of basic copy, I think those jobs are gonna be lost. So the company that hired 100 people, I think, will be hiring 75 people, and maybe a few years out will be hiring 50 people.
But mostly, I think you use the phrase, a lot of what it's going to be is going to co-pilot. And you can talk about any industries, and including, seems to me, the most interesting and impactful would probably be healthcare. Go ahead.
Right. So I think the best way to understand this is it's an assistant. You're the creative. You're the one who's giving it ideas. It's not like there's these text video. It's not like make me a Scorsese film. You have to be the creative. You have to come with the story idea, the plot points, the characters, what happens in it. But I mean, think about it. Like, you don't have to raise millions of dollars to make your movie. I mean, there's some negatives to this. A lot of people aren't going to be employed, but you could be a director and make your AI movie, or at least you can make special effects in your movie that would otherwise be so expensive. I mean, so across the board, we can imagine, you're a lawyer. So instead of having a bunch of paralegals, like, hey, do some preliminary research. Now, one huge caution here, it's called hallucinations, they make mistakes. There's a famous case here in New York from a couple of years back where a lawyer handed in a pleading, and all 5 of the cases cited were made up. So you have to fact check. I mean, what I do is I go to one, Perplexity it's called, and it footnotes everything. So I can make sure, like, okay, what's telling me, is this based in reality or is this made up?
Gary, I didn't get a hard copy of the book. I've got a PDF, and it makes it hard to hold it up, but I'm putting a link to the book in the chat for those that are watching live. Could you hold it up too? Do you have it there?
Yeah,
AI Valley. It's so good. It's a good cover. I like it. And I like all the rest of your books behind you too. But a lot of this book is the story of how AI came to be and who the players are, many of which you've interviewed and spent time with them, and the role that venture capitalism plays. But I don't like that phrase, venture capitalism. And I think, erudite veteran journalists like yourself don't realize that some of us don't know any venture capitalists, or if we do, we don't know that they are. And what's the difference between them and just regular investors? And then we can get to the role that they play here and how maybe few of them are having such a huge impact. But you've been covering these investors and this style of investment for much of your career. Just give me, a rudimentary definition of who these players are now.
Yeah. So one key difference between, an investor, an angel investor, they're sometimes called it puts in their own money. Venture capitalists mainly are investing other people's money. And so a venture capital outfit will go and raise money from rich individuals, pension funds, university endowments, foundations, that kind of thing. And they're putting kind of large chunks of money into these startups. I mean, famously, Reid Hoffman put, his firm put 5 million or so into Airbnb, and they made 1,000x his money. Now, on the other end, when the company goes public, once a larger company buys it, the venture capitalists are getting 20 to 30% of the money made. So if they made $1 billion on their fund, they're splitting 200 million, 300 million, dollars of that. So the venture capital game is a very good game if you could get into it.
You have to, but anytime I hear that phrase or even angel investor, I'm always just like, all right, these are people that somehow got a lot of money. They obtain. You can't just become a producer of a film. I mean, you start with a tremendous amount of money, and then you can call yourself an investor or a venture capitalist. Is that fair?
Well, that's exactly right. And by the way, it could be frustrating, maybe like the movie business. It's really a hits business. And so for every 10 investments a venture capital will make, a third will just go out of business and be a total bust, sometimes an embarrassing bust. Another 4 or 5 of those will make a little bit of money. But really, it's about kind of those companies you put the money in and you make 10, 50, 100 times your money. And those are few and far between, of course, for VCs, for venture capitalists.
Tell me about the beginning of the book, the creators, that chapter. This is where we get to know a lot of the players early on. And it's really important and fascinating, and especially to see where they are now. One of them, I think, is cutting the federal government with a chainsaw.
Yeah. Weirdly, the first 2 words of the book, which I started a year and a half ago or 14 months ago, are Elon Musk. I started off with a dinner in 2015 between Elon Musk and Reid Hoffman. And to give Musk his credit, he was really early on AI. He started making AI investments in the early 2010s. But as Reid Hoffman said, of him, the two know each other back to their PayPal days. They both worked at PayPal in the late 90s, early 2000s. He had, Musk has a God complex. Everything will be okay in the world as long as I'm running it. And, I think we've all seen that. But, you talk about the creators. What was interesting to me, which I didn't know, was that, artificial intelligence was coined in the 1950s. And they were very exuberantly optimistic. They thought in the 50s and 60s, we were like 10 years away. So AI has been tantalizingly just around the next corner for 70 years. It really wasn't until the 2010s, the mid 2010s, when they realized, like, oh, instead of like coding line by line by line by line, which is kind of this brute force approach that's kind of impossible to anticipate everything, let's create a neural network, machine learning, that these machines would learn in the fashion of a human, that will train on books, on scientific papers, on video, whatever they're training them for. And that was kind of the magic insight that's kind of brought us what we have now with ChatGPT, et cetera.
Tell me a little bit more about the original investors, because some of them made out real big, and they're the players today, and some of them not so much.
Right. So, I mean, the U.S. government has been investing in AI since the 1950s, something very relevant to today, given we have a government that's stopping investing in, cutting edge frontier research, which is so short-sighted. It's kind of what America's great secret sauce is, but we'll put that aside for a minute. But so in the early 2010s, there was this company in London, not Silicon Valley, called DeepMind. That was the first hugely successful machine learning AI company. Google bought it for $650 million, but Peter Thiel, another famous name right now, he's the one who basically gave us JD Vance. He and Musk and a few others put money into this company, DeepMind, which ended up being a huge payout for them.
I just got to ask you, outside of the book, your thoughts on the thinkers, these influential few thinkers in Silicon Valley, like Curtis Yarvin and plenty of others. You mentioned Peter Thiel, and their impact on the White House and government right now. It would seem that JD Vance is a creation of Peter Thiel's. He worked from his young man. Peter Thiel invested in him, made him a senator, helped him get chosen as VP. But I interviewed this guy, Gil Duran, and Gil, there's a bunch of really interesting journalism being written about the theories that people like Elon Musk and Curtis Yarvin and others have, and how they're actually being enacted right now by the federal government. And I just want to know what you think about Duran and any of the other journalists that are covering this, and if you think that the impact of the tech bros and their view on what the world should become is accurate or fair, or something that we should be paying a lot of attention to.
Yeah, I think Duran, Wired, there's some great journalism around this. I guess I have a different perspective, or at least I'm focused on something else. It's like, why did Silicon Valley, or at least why did the leaders in Silicon Valley, switch from Hillary Clinton, Biden, et cetera, to Trump? And we could say a whole lot of words, but I think it's really, really simple. The Biden administration had very strict policies around crypto, and they had what I thought were gentle regulations around AI. So at least there's some guardrails on this thing. And Mark Andreessen, Elon Musk, et cetera, Silicon Valley did not like that they were standing in the way of their good thing. And so as soon as Trump came into office, within 24 hours, he got rid of the AI executive order and these gentle regulations. And, within a month or so, they had, got rid of all the crypto. So there were like 50 or so investigations into crypto companies that they were either prosecuted and trying to come with fines, or they were in the middle of investigation. They dropped them all. They dropped almost all the rules around crypto, and Silicon Valley's got in their way. I mean, kind of the biggest trend in Silicon Valley right now, the thing that's driving venture capitalists is obviously artificial intelligence. I think they put like $150 billion venture capitalists did into AI startups last year. And, one of the other 2 or 3 big thrusts is crypto. And with Trump, they now have 4 years of no regulation, full speed ahead. And so they got what they want. There are very clear business reasons why they preferred a Trump over a Biden or a Kamala Harris.
I think that's just in addition to the kind of philosophy that Duran writes about these guys having, is you're giving it more meat on the bones there in terms of what their interests are. Even those who aren't political, investors don't want regulations and guardrails on AI and crypto. They want to make a lot of money off of that, it would seem. So whether they have any political ideologies, or they care about social issues or democracy or anything like that, they really just don't want any impediment on their activity, on their investments, right? It's anti-regulation.
And let's add arrogance. It's just like they're know-it-alls. I mean, there's this thing, kind of it's almost like the Midas delusion. Like, I made $1 billion. I just did this incredible thing or set of things in technology. Therefore, I must know everything about education and government across the boards. And it's funny. I've listened to Mark Andreessen. I've known him since the late 1990s. He's the founder of Netscape. He's a very prominent venture capitalist now in Silicon Valley, and he was one of the main people kind of swinging Silicon Valley from the Democrats to Trump. Mm-hmm. And it's like I wrote one of those books over my shoulder, in part about the creation of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I know that topic really, really, really well. Yeah. And just listening to him to talk about it for 5 minutes, it's like Elizabeth Warren's in favor of the big banks. Like, what? What are you talking about? But they're on Joe Rogan. They talk really fast. They sound really smart, and stuff. And like, here, there's another reason. Elon Musk gutted this Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. He will claim for ideological reasons, whatever. No. XAI, one of his companies, is getting into financial services. Guess who would stand in the way of him doing financial service the way he wants to? There are rules, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is going to say, you can do this, but you need to follow the set of rules. You get rid of them, you don't have the cop on the beat, as Elizabeth Warren would say. That's why they're getting rid of the CFPB.
So well said. You're such a treasure, an American treasure of journalism. The wide range of issues that you've written about after the flood, Katrina after the flood, saving Main Street, small business in the time of COVID-19. I think that's the last time I talked to you about that book, which is so important. I think you're talking about Broke USA, from pawn shops to Poverty Inc., how the working poor became big business. And I'm not even mentioning like 7 of your other books, but of course we're talking about AI Valley. And you've mentioned just briefly Elon Musk. We've talked just a little bit about Mark Andreessen, Peter Thiel. What about Sam Altman? Are there any good guys in AI?
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about Sam Altman, who, by the way, right this moment is testifying before the Senate. Ted Cruz has a committee, but is having a hearing on AI, which is basically no rules. We have to beat the Chinese. Stop with the hand wringing about AI. Let's just win this war. But, Altman. He was before the Senate in 23 saying like, I'm scared of this thing if we don't take safety precautions. I think we should be regulated. And so like there was this point where like, okay, he's being thoughtful about it. Well, but now Trump was elected. Like, wait, I don't have to say that anymore. Right. And now they've changed their strategy, open AI. So he's really slippery. Let's say it. I thought so. The main startup at the center of my book is this called Inflection. They created Pi, bot high EQ, emotional intelligence, which I was really intrigued by. It could be your companion, your friend, it would understand you. You could have a conversation with it. But the folks behind that, Reid Hoffman, I think, he's kind of a billionaire. You can root for. He's got his private planes, etc. But he seems a good human being. Mustafa Suleyman, his co-founder, the CEO. He's been one of the biggest advocates. Is we can't use AI in warfare. We can't use AI for surveillance. Like saying like there has to be limits the way we use this thing. In fact, when they sold DeepMind to Google, they put those as preconditions. You can't use this technology for those reasons. By the way, Google earlier this year said, drop their vow not to use it for surveillance. Drop their vow.
Such an important moment in time and such an important news story that could, have an effect on our lives more than anything else. But it kind of, I'm not going to say went unnoticed, people in your world and others, but it like the impact of them making that change, that ethical change, and then the rest of them as well. Those moments are real, I would imagine, crucible moments in time, and the impact that they're going to have that most of us will probably never know that they have.
You mentioned that the laser-eyed robots that are going to subjugate humanity. That's the stuff of Hollywood. That's the stuff of movies. This stuff isn't even close to powerful enough. I wish we were worrying and debating the things that really matter. We've mentioned surveillance and the use of AI in warfare, but the idea of using AI for criminal sentencing, the idea of using AI to predict who was going to commit a criminal act. These things, they just reflect our biases. They're trained on our text. They're trained on our thinking. So they reflect our biases. So I'm really scared of that. I'm scared of autonomous AI. This idea that we're going to have AI without a human in the loop, that scares the bejeebers out of me. Like, again, it's a co-pilot. It's an important tool. I use it to help me. I'm writing it. It's my ideas, but the idea that we're going to like have AI running some system, these things don't know a thing. Like, AI is, of course, artificial intelligence, but some have said it's an alien intelligence. It sort of like knows a lot about everything in a way no human being can, but it understands nothing. It's a parrot. It's just repeating, it's just repeating words, but has no comprehension. So it has no common sense and stuff. So the idea that AI would be able to be in charge of anything scares me.
Isn't one of the dilemmas that even if America did the right thing, even if these billionaire owners and investors did the quote right thing, the ethical thing around AI mostly, that the Chinese wouldn't necessarily, or some other nation wouldn't abide by the same ethics? It's almost like climate. Like, we could stop polluting and invest entirely on renewable energy, and then the rest of the world might buy it, they might not, but they're not necessarily going to stop polluting. Again, China, some other major influential rich country. How is it that simple that even if we did the right thing, if another nation investing in AI did not have the same ethical rules, then it wouldn't matter?
Yeah, I mean, the Chinese are a real threat here. They're nipping at our heels. The U.S. models are slightly better. They're slightly ahead of the Chinese models that, the Chinese government has said by 2030, China, need to dominate AI. So the threat is real. But, I'm not saying pause this. I'm saying, like, let's have sensible trust and safety issues in place. In fact, 5 years ago, the people creating these models, the people creating ChatGPT, et cetera, they were stressing trust and safety. And it's really kind of gone by the wayside. Like, now there's a race going on. It's you say China, from what I said, it's kind of a race against each other. Well, Google has their model and OpenAI has their model, and there's
right.
others, Meta, has theirs, and it's a race to best each other. And I think both can happen. We can kind of be putting out cutting edge models, but just do basic stuff. Like, just use one example that the Biden administration had is like, it's called red teaming. Before you release one of these powerful models, just you hire some outside company and they try to break it. They try to figure out where the vulnerabilities are. Just go through that process just to make sure you're not putting out this dangerous thing. Share the results with government, and then you can release it. And that was a real priority early on for these AI companies, and that's going by the wayside. Whether you're talking about Google, OpenAI, or almost any company I can mention.
Why?
Money. It's a race. If you come up with a chatbot that's going to be the thing that the world is going to pay for, if you could create the next Google or Facebook and have that kind of, dominance where you literally have billions of people using it, that's a lot of money. That's, it's $1 trillion opportunity. And so it's just the stakes here.
You can't compete with any of these companies, most of which you mentioned, because there's no way to have enough money for a startup. It's been decided. The masters of the universe, it's been because the entry, the cost of entry is too much because of the energy that it takes, and it's just like billions and billions of dollars. And you could put all the venture capitalists in the world together, and you just would not be able to compete with the bigs. Is that your theory, suggestion in the book?
Yeah, that's another big fear of mine, that AI is going to be in the hands of the same small group of big tech companies, which, not incidentally, we've witnessed for the last 10 or 20 years, get us into a really bad place. I mean, Google is one of the dominant companies. Google surveillance capital. Google is, we're going to fire your search, we have a cell phone in our pocket. We're going to see where you go. We're going to bundle that data up and sell it to the highest bidder. Meta, they're really big in AI. Well, Meta has made a lot of money by amping up their algorithms, so we're at each other's throats because outrage means more time on device. So the same small group of companies that have kind of messed up our world are going to be in charge of AI because of how expensive it is. Google, Microsoft, they have $100 billion on hand. A small startup, they have to have the data to train these things. They have to hire these, kind of machine learning specialists. Could be $1 million or more per year for these folks. But mostly, it's, as you're pointing out, it's the chips and the energy. It's like hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, to train, fine tune, and then operate these things. They're huge energy hogs. That's another big concern here. Yeah. They take enormous amounts of energy. It's only going to increase.
I hate that part. Before I let you go, very few people, I think very few journalists understand the kind of nexus between the private and public sector, the role of local, state, and federal governments in investing in communities in our nation and how that plays out. So I wanted to ask you just a two-parter here at the end. Based on what you've written, what you've covered over your career, what is your answer to the question about the damage that has been done as a result of these cuts led by Elon Musk and his terrible Doge organization, and then the damage that'll be done to small, middle, and large businesses as a result of the tariffs? I suppose you can connect the two, but it felt like we were really, really concerned about the Doge cuts. We saw our friends, neighbors, loved ones losing their jobs in the federal government. We read the headlines and thought, oh my God, we're not going to have anybody regulating airplanes or viruses or food or anything. And then all of a sudden came the tariff threat. So given your journalism, given what you've written, understand, how do you see both of those issues, or would you combine them two, I suppose?
Yeah, so on the tariffs and kind of the short-sightedness I mentioned before of cutting off federal investments and cutting-edge research, we're so scared of the Chinese becoming dominant. Like, I think the moves this country has taken the last few months increases the odds that the Chinese are going to best us, that the 21st century is going to eventually be the Chinese century because of what we're doing. It's just like
it's unbelievable. It really does feel like we shot ourselves, we punched ourselves in the dick, or stepped on our own tail, whatever phrase you want to use. It's such a self-inflicted wound, and most frustratingly, led by like one guy, not even led by a popular ideology, at least on the tariffs, maybe different on the cuts. Sorry to interrupt you, but it's just so frustrating to see us do this to ourselves.
We're shortchanging infrastructure. I'm imagining, I hope this isn't true, but when you cut meat inspectors and you cut air traffic control and all these cuts that makes no sense, nuclear regulation, like, I really fear something bad is going to happen. That it's just like again, we're just going to just take a gun and just shoot ourselves, kind of thing. It just seems so short-sighted. And like even Elon Musk, he's a great environmentalist. He gave us electric cars. Like, well, how has the U.S. government dropped its incentives for EVs? Like, this is the future. I think most of us, all of us, can agree on this. How is Silicon Valley, that's so based in science, kind of on the side of a group of an administration that denies climate change? You're scientists, better than this.
Because you know why? Because
money.
The upcoming quarter, like if I could make $100 million in a real short period of time, or a few $1 million, I mean, that'll compromise your ethics on anything regarding the future, including your own children.
Right. Yeah. So no, I'm with you. It's just I mean, there's a lot to find abhorrent. We could choose it, but as far as kind of like the long-term strategy around technology, keeping the U.S. ahead on technology, I really feel like if you would ask me this a year ago, I'd say, we're going to stay ahead of the Chinese. I mean, it'd be a robust competition. I have the opposite view. I say the odds that the Chinese are going to best us just went way up in the last 6 months.
Well, maybe you'll be wrong. You ever think about that, Gary?
Yeah, I've been wrong plenty. We can go over that too. I mean, I'm not always right, but for instance, I didn't expect Donald Trump to be our president for a second time.
Yeah.
January 6th. What kind of odds would you have to take a bet on Donald Trump on January 7th of 2021 being our president? So yeah, I think we've all been wrong a lot.
I just read this article yesterday. You said something really bad's I'm afraid something bad's gonna happen, and you mentioned like meat inspectors. Yesterday there was an article in the Atlantic that was titled "Not a great not a great time to buy romaine lettuce or lettuce in a bag," and I read it, and it's like, I love lettuce in a bag. I hate bags. I try not to buy things in them, but I buy a lot of lettuce in a bag, and it's what you're talking about. It's a result of the federal government not being able to regulate anything ag. And that's terrifying. You mentioned meat, but I'm talking about lettuce.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, and it's been interesting for me. I know Mark Andreessen, I know Peter Thiel. I've interviewed both of them a bunch of times, but this kind of I like the term that techno-authoritarianism. It's just sort of like, nothing counts other than us selling our next product, giving you this technology. We have no obligation to society because this is what's going to make us strong and great.
They have no obligation to America, most specifically, right? Like billionaire investors, the Rockefellers had some interest in American railroads and like these guys are interested in investing in the planet and having a kind of global autocracy, and as you mentioned, they're know-it-all, so they'll run it just fine. Like it seems like it's such a multinational investment, their tech, that they're not thinking about what's in the best interest of any specific nation or society. Is that fair?
Well, rhetorically they would say they're being pro-American because kind of the libs, the Democrats, whatever, are putting too many regulations on industry. So by lifting those regulations, we can make America strong again. Like, hey, listen, the idea that we should have essential stuff made here, we all saw in 2020, how important that is. Like almost every computer chip's made in Taiwan. I get why this is important, but
the Biden administration and Democrats picked those industries. Government picked those industries after the pandemic and invested in those industries, chip makers, batteries, and all the medicine, right? Like, didn't they have a strategic investment in those?
You stole the word from my mouth. Like, it's like, okay, you want to come up with tariffs, like, well, let's spend a year making sure that we could build up our capacity here in the U.S. So once we impose those tariffs, then like, oh wow, now all these American manufacturers can do it. And let's kind of make distinction. Like, do we really want iPods iPhones to be made here, like tiny little screws and kind of stuff like that? Is that the kind of jobs that we want? Like, I mean, some of
that's what I want my daughters to do. I actually want my daughters to do that work. I think it builds character.
No, actually, because of AI, you want your daughters to be electricians or plumbers, because those are two professions I see. It's going to be a long, long, long time before AI or the robots take those over. I'm kidding, of course. Your kids should do what makes them happy. But, really, I am scared that there are a lot of jobs. You name a job, journalism, it's like it's a long way away from ever writing the kind of books I write or beautiful novels or anything like that. But it could write a good press release. It could write a basic report. It could write a basic news story. I mean, someone has to interview humans, but it's actually a competent writer right now. And so that does kind of scare me, that a lot of the entry level positions that are kind of the stepping stone to better positions are going to be taken over by AI in the short and medium term.
Do you think AI will take the place of journalists who go out and to rule America and ask white people what they're angry about?
Okay, funny, but it's like no, and this is this is the thing. Like, investigative journalists, it could be an important tool for investigative journalists. What it is great at is looking through a vast data set and finding patterns that no human being could ever find. It could sort through. It never gets tired. It could work 24/7 and moves very, very fast. It could read 1 million documents, almost, in a matter of hours, and digest it and find patterns and find quotes. It's an important tool, but I have to go to that diner to write the cliche story about the pro-Trump folks who feel, whatever, eggs are too expensive. Doesn't that seem so quaint now that eggs are expensive? Like,
I mean, yeah, now that I can only get $2. Oh, before you go, that's my big question of the week. I heard some Republican on TV, some congressman say, America is good at shared sacrifice or something like that. America is ready, is willing to make a shared sacrifice. And I'm cynical, but I'm not the most cynical person, who lives on the left. I can see a lot of different things. But I thought I'd ask you that real quick. I'm asking all the smart people. Like, I can't think of a time in my life where Americans came together for a shared sacrifice, meaning they took less for the betterment of their community or society, much less they worked harder for. JFK asked not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, and other ideas. Like, America's not really, we haven't been that way in a long time. Yeah, in our communities, there's a lot of good people that do things for each other, take less, pay more in their communities and so on. But like the federal government, I just thought it was so weird that Trump and now Republicans are saying, we'll limit Americans to come together and limit their consumption. Like, if a Democrat ever said that, but more importantly, do we ever do that, Gary? Shared sacrifice this generation?
This generation, World War II, I think.
Yeah, World War II.
But
sure.
It's like, I mean, to me, the joke of that, what I immediately thought of was Jimmy Carter with his sweater in the Oval Office saying, like, we're going through an energy crisis. We need to use, turn down your thermostats. And he was not reelected, and I do think that's the reason why. He was someone saying, how about a little bit of shared sacrifice for the bigger cause? So basically, since the mid-1970s, that's gone out the window. I had the same reaction to, like, what country you're I mean, there are moments, after September 11th, we came together and, we're one country.
It's different.
But there really wasn't much sacrifice, right?
No, exactly. That's different. Like, I was in Manhattan on 9/11, so I know, like, some of us wanted to go give blood. That wasn't even needed. Nobody got injured. You either died or you lived. I mean, but there was no shared sacrifice in terms of, I don't know, I guess the first responders who stood in that rubble and did shit, whether or not they knew it was, but seriously, like, they were doing their job. Like, people, we don't really, that's not our country's ethos or DNA. Maybe it's no countries anymore. I don't know. But it doesn't seem like that's something that we would be willing to give up. But, if your dear leader, if you really believe in somebody so much, maybe you would do it. Maybe those folks will give up something or work harder for the collective good of their community. Doubtful, Gary.
I mean, what else were they going to say? Like, would they say something stupid like, instead of owning $30, you could own two? Oh, right. They did say that one, didn't they? That same kind of thing. Like, how dare you, Mr. Billionaire, who has a gold toilet and has so many toys and so many houses and whatever. It's just like, really? But again, like, what's their talking point? Like, okay, we've wrecked the economy. There's no clear, end game here. So, we're sacrificing for the good of America. So,
Gary, I would rather ask you to prognosticate on anything than a lot of people, but I will let you go. And hopefully we can catch up soon again and talk about all these other issues, because I really do think that your thoughts and values and opinion and analysis on stuff is very valuable because of your journalism and your career and what you've done. And I would argue what I think is a moral clarity that you have always had. I really appreciate you joining me. Congrats on the new book, AI Valley. I hope people go buy it. I hope you never retire or die.
Well, thanks, Pete. I too hope I never die.
And I know that you have to get to your Matthew Modine lookalike competition. That's what I was trying to think. I was like, who does he look like? Do people tell you that? The actor Matthew Modine, a great head of hair, a great face.
Well, when I was younger, it was Val Kilmer.
Oh, yes.
There was a couple of movies. When I was much slimmer, there were a couple of movies where I was watching, like, geez, that does look like me.
There's a lot there. Yeah, no, you look like your parents are Val Kilmer and Matthew Modine. Thanks, Gary, for joining me. I'll let you go. I really appreciate you. Great work.
I loved it. Thanks so much, Pete.